adult autistic. It is really cool to meet other adult autistics living their best unmasked autistic life. And Zach does that well. And then he is also herding cats as the person running Square Pegs, which is an autism meetup group. And I believe the biggest in the world or the US.
I mean, it really depends on how you define it. Like, we seem to be the largest autistic run one, but there's one in Pakistan that's larger than us, but they don't seem to be
Pakistan.
autistic run. So, you know.
Well, cool. Zach.
Oh, okay. Is that my cue? Should I like start saying words now?
Yes. Say
Okay, sorry.
words.
I'm not always fully articulated before like 11 o'clock in the morning. So I'm going to try my best. So yeah, hi everyone. Peter, thanks so much for that introduction. I'm really getting a blast from the past, just being in the same Zoom meeting as you. So yeah, well, I guess I will get started. I'm going to hit the button that allows me to share my screen. Okay, are y'all able to see my screen? Cool. So yeah, I'm just going to talk a little about like what the Square Pegs is, what we do, why we are, and how you find us. As for questions, like feel free to either type questions in chat, or use the raise hand feature in the reaction tab, or just like, violently wave your arms or something else like that, something that'll get my attention. So just a little about me. I, as Peter and many others have alluded to, I am in fact autistic, spicily so in many cases. I am also a social worker and a community organizer. Just growing up, it was really difficult to find other people who I could really relate to. I was probably one of the first ever like autistic folks ever diagnosed in my school district. Which was in Western Colorado. And, back then in the 90s, like, probably the best we could hope for people actually knowing what autism was maybe seeing Rain Man, which, I'm glad things are a little better today, but back then things were a little bleaker than they were today. And it just meant that like I was working with a lot of like professionals, teachers, random members of the public who definitely sort of like had the best intentions for me. And ultimately we're just like really approaching things from a non-autistic, neurotypical viewpoint about things like how do I form friendships? How should I really value my social relationships with other people? What should community look like for me? And of course, like, since I was autistic and I could speak with my mouth parts, the message I always got was like, since I'm quote unquote high functioning, and I hate that term for just so many different reasons, like I would be able to do whatever I wanted to do in life, and my autism wouldn't hold me back. And I sort of, bought into that viewpoint until I was fired from my first two jobs after college. And then I was like, it's not really going to be up to me on like whether or not my autism is going to be a problem. It's up to all the non-autistic people around me in positions of power who have the ability to decide like whether or not my accommodations are, going to be provided, or, my differences are going to be, at best celebrated, or at least like tolerated. And as I knew and then discovered for myself, like it's really rare for autistic folks to have good like supportive workplaces. Like there's a reason we have a 80% unemployment rate. And so that sort of just like radicalized me to become a social worker. And so I ended up getting my MSW about 5 years ago in 2018 at UW Seattle. And while I was getting my MSW, or even before then, like I had gotten connected with the Square Pegs, which, for those of you who haven't heard of us, we're a meetup group in, I was going to say in like Western Washington, but since COVID, we're now very online. And it's really given me a lot of great connections with other autistic folks. So I started facilitating a group there back in like 2016. And then in 2018, the person who had founded the Square Pegs, sort of burnt out, gave the organizership to another person who lasted 6 months, and then she quit and left without appointing a replacement. So I sort of was like, okay, I got to do something about this. And decided, okay, I can try and like find another successor, and because I'm going to grad school. That didn't happen, and so for the past like 6, 7 years now, I've been as I think Peter described it, the chief cat herder of the Square Pigs. Before we go into the Square Pigs, though, I should say, I'm the Disability Systems Navigation Coordinator at the Arc of King County. My main role at the Arc of King County is to do a lot of presentations like this. Thankfully, today's a light day. I'm only doing 2 presentations, but we do a lot of information and referral services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in King County and other places as well. So if you come across like any clients or other people who are needing support in finding resources within King County, they are totally welcome to, call us at this phone number here. We do have non-autistic people who work there who are willing to take phone calls, fortunately. Or they can email us here at ask@arcofkingcounty.org, and we will assist people as best we can. So in terms of actually thinking about like really what is the Square Pigs? Basically, we're a series of meetup groups for autistic adults. Initially, we were an in-person meetup group in Western Washington. Since COVID, we're about 50% virtual, 50% online. 50% in person, 50% online. Most of our in-person groups are, in King County. We've got one down in Tacoma that meets, I think it's the 3rd Wednesday of every month at Elmer's Restaurant. We're all entirely autistic led. We've got about 24 volunteer facilitators from, all walks of life, everything from like, a couple of like child therapists, social workers, quote unquote, like clinical professionals to like, housewives, chefs, like a guy who's responsible for making sure there's food like every 100 feet for the tech workers at Google, stuff like that. And really, it's just a place where we can find like community with one another, where we can exist in spaces where, we're not always going to be forced to mask or like hide our autistic traits to make the non-autistic people around us feel more comfortable. So we've got around an average of 25 groups happening a month. So, typically people are able to find groups, based on their schedule, and the groups are like, and we can go through the groups later on, but it's everything from like, your traditional support groups, more like casual, like social groups, a couple of like activity groups, like there's a really popular like Magic the Gathering group. There's a couple of like art making spaces. There's a couple of like podcast discussion groups or like book clubs that seem to form. We really do try to make sure that like autistic people with like multiply marginalized identities also have spaces they can go. So currently we have 2 queer support groups, one in person, one virtual. We've got 2 groups for autistic women / non-binary folks. I am currently in the process of trying to add a group for BIPOC autistic folks or AAC users, whether they be like part-time or full-time. In terms of like thinking about who shows up to the group, it's typically a mix of folks. And just as for like why the Square Pigs exists, like I think this comic does a pretty good job of it. It's just like, I'm sure y'all know, like when you're living life as an autistic person, it's just like, it's challenging, it's tiring, whether it be because of, the aspects of autism that make it more challenging, or, because like the world isn't really set up for people like us, especially as adults. It really does feel like, we're having to like fend for ourselves right now. Like things are pretty challenging. It feels like it's difficult to find like accessible mental health services, especially if you're on like Medicaid or Medicare. There's still relatively few programs that really operate from like neurodiversity framework and not a like deficit based, very medicalized model framework. And it's just like, it is so freeing. And my cat's trying to get my attention. So if I'm like, if you see something like violently shooting across my screen, it's probably that. It's just like, it is so freeing to exist in spaces where we don't have to, where we don't have to conform to other people's expectations, where those expectations aren't necessarily serving us, or, for instance, just teaching us to like form superficial social relationships in a way that doesn't give us the same sort of like, dopamine brain-based reward that like neurotypical people get when they're around, their favorite people interacting in neurotypical ways. That's not something we want in the square pegs. So as for, thinking about like who typically attends the square pegs, like we don't necessarily have any like formalized criteria for who's allowed to attend. Typically the folks who attend are, you know, age 16 up. Its gender ratio, it's pretty close to 50, 50. And then, you've got all the non-binary and other gender non-conforming folks showing up as well. Primarily the folks who attend are, verbal or, maybe levels 1 or 2. We do got a couple level 3s who attend occasionally. Anyone's welcome to attend if they're autistic or, they suspect they may be autistic. We've got a lot of folks figuring out like, if they're autistic and seeing if they fit in a group of like other, autistic weirdos. Average age probably like, I would guess late 20s. So it's it's a pretty cool group of folks. And then as for like how do you find the square pegs? Well, first you go to meetup.com. Are y'all able to see the website I navigated to? Cool. So you just search for the square pegs on Meetup or go to www.meetup.com/squarepegs. You'll get to this menu. Meetup is unfortunately a pretty clunky site, but you'll still, it's what we've been using to organize for the past like 10 or 15 years. And so you'll be able to see like all of the different groups we've got going on. So you can see it either in like list form where you just see like the next groups happening. It looks like the Tacoma one is happening on the 18th. And you can see like, if the groups are in person or virtual by going to the specific group listing. You can see like when the group is being held, like where specifically the group is being held. And then all of the facilitators will just like give listings of like what the group is going to be like, what you can expect in terms of like attending the group. And you can also see like, how many folks are going to be attending the group. And if it's difficult for you to see like the group itself in like list form, you can also like look at the calendar, and you'll see like when what groups are happening on what days and like when they're happening. So yeah, that pretty much is like everything I have to present on. Do folks have any questions for me?
I
Okay.
attend the spot, the virtual one, and I see a lot of autistic people. They ask me about support groups here in Kitsap County, but they don't come to events. So should I just organize one off the meetup group and see who shows up, and maybe it's just me? Or also I'm not trained.
Yep.
I don't have a college degree.
Yep.
I'm not a social worker. I would rather someone else do it. But I'm kind of feel the way you presented this, I got the feeling that you also would have preferred someone else to have started this in the beginning, and now it's just something you do.
Yeah. I
Am
mean,
I
it's
wrong?
basic. Yeah. So like I know I owe you an email. I've been behind this week because of all the presentations I've been doing. But I'll get back to you with the other thing this week. But yeah, if you we can also talk about like you know, if you want to set up a group in Kitsap, totally, like, you don't need to be like, you know, a psychologist or like a social worker. About half the folks who run the groups aren't like, you know, mental health professionals, and they're able to make it work. So yeah, we can definitely talk like specifics. It's, you know, I think would be cool to have a group over there. We did have one in Bremerton previously, that went pretty well before COVID. Yeah. Any other questions? I think I heard another voice.
Are there are there many groups in Pierce County?
Just one. We have one in Tacoma that meets, I believe it's the third Wednesday of every month, at Elmer's, the Elmer's restaurant over there, I think.
Okay.
But you know, we have plenty of folks attending virtually from Pierce County. That's, you know, and I mean, like, we get folks from like all over the world showing up to our groups virtually. So, you know, there's no real like geographic restrictions anymore if people can do virtual. If not, like, you know, I'm always down for, you know, getting more groups created in person with, you know, as long as they're organized by autistic folks.
Cool.
Zach, how do you, it sounds like, you know, obviously for a variety of reasons, sometimes virtual groups are preferred. Like, is it usually just the group members decide if they want to do an in-person meetup, and then it goes from there? Like, it's fine to just kind of start with virtual, or like, how does that get figured out?
You mean as regards to like how the groups are started, or like if someone decides to attend the group or not?
Yeah, because I just know, like, even here in this group, we have a member who's autistic, and it's just very challenging for him. He actually doesn't prefer online; he prefers in person.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think that there could be strong feelings either way. And so I'm just wondering how that gets figured out, if it's a majority or it depends on who started it, or.
Yeah. It primarily depends on like who starts it. You know, I do try to make sure like we've got as many like in-person and as many virtual groups as possible, but you know, there's definitely a lot of folks who do prefer the in-person communication, and there definitely is like, it is easier to form connections with other people that way. But then it's also like, you know, when groups start getting so large in person, like you start getting a lot of the like sensory, you know, barriers that happen in large groups of people. And so a lot of people will just prefer, you know, virtual groups for that reason. But typically I will say like our virtual groups tend to be the ones that are more attended. I think primarily just for ease of access, and also the like sensory barriers as well that happen in in-person groups.
Yeah. Well, and as far as like, do you have any tips for those of us that are neurotypical on how to present this as a resource for our autistic clients in a way that they'll be more receptive? Because I feel like I've tried to promote this. Sometimes it's been readily received, but lots of times I know there's a lot of hesitance.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a good question, and it's a hard one. A lot of it comes down to, you know, when you've faced so much social rejection in your life, it's going to be hard to believe that there can be a space that's going to be welcoming and accommodating to you. You know, we do get, you know, a lot of like first timers do disclose they got a lot of like social anxiety going on, and that, you know, maybe made it like months or years before they actually showed up to a Square Pegs group despite knowing it. So I think a lot of it is just like working through the anxiety, just helping, you know, just like talking to folks about like what we do, what we are. You can totally send folks my way via email if you know, they have more questions. And I think it's just like, you know, just supporting people as is usually useful. Folks will usually join, it just takes time. Malia, I think I saw your hand raised earlier.
I get a lot of people referring autistic young adults to me because they need a social outlet, but autistic people aren't necessarily great friends for each other. And I do promote meetup because we have our own interests.
Right.
We want to info dump about our own things. They have Peter. What?
No, because I would actually argue 100% the other, and the research backs that. When you have autistics together, a lot of the deficits go away. And in my work, you know, creating autistic-led spaces where they can safely unmask A lot of the times, a lot of the trauma and the kludgy mask garbage that tends to make things difficult does go away. The one kind of counterexample to that, and I think this is a really critical autistic social skill, is dealing with the incompatible neurodiversity. For example, when you have one kid that's really noise sensitive and one kid that's really noisy, then yeah, you get problems, but that's, and once you start viewing that from a holistic lens, you know, an introvert probably isn't gonna like hang out with a super extrovert party animal. Same sort of things. There's just different people, and you know, you can't just say, oh, autistics should all be friends with each other. No, people shouldn't be all friends with each other. That's not how people work. But in my work, I found that if you can find a lot of kind of parallels, you can teach them to unmask safely, be able to support each other through that process, and be um, really cogent in finding the same sort of autistic frequency. I think once they're unmasking and being genuinely autistic, I think then things can work a lot better. And I think it's actually, once you've successfully unmasked, it's easier to be friends with autistic people than neurotypical people.
Well, yeah, we say the truth. I'm just thinking about, like, in my daughter's case, rule breakers and rule followers.
Hmm.
There's just so many flavors.
Hmm.
And just because you're autistic doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna get along. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and that, like I, you know, what I would say is like, you know, there definitely are some autistic people who won't get along with one another for like a variety of reasons, whether it be because of like different sensory needs or just strongly conflicting viewpoints. But typically, from what I've seen, it is easier for autistic people to make friends with one another. Like, you know, like you both have said, there's no guarantee that it's going to happen, but I would say it's more likely than with like non-autistic folks, for sure.
definitely get your own sense of community there. Yeah.
It's nice.
Like, oh, does this happen to you? Yeah, that happens to me. What does it mean when they say this? Oh, I didn't know that. What, yeah. Like yesterday, did you know that when someone asks if you're hungry, they're actually inviting you out to lunch? What? Yeah.
I had a question. We get a lot of emails from parents that are very concerned about their middle schoolers that are autistic or adult kids. It seems like they're the ones that are trying to force them into social situations. And I really don't know how to respond to that sometimes because I want to be supportive of the parents, but more importantly, supportive of the autistic because I remember that happening to me in middle school. You know, you have to do this, you need to do this. Does anyone have any thoughts on a supportive yet firm response to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it just comes down to, you know, I get a lot of those emails as well. I often just say, you know, I'll often give them like information about the square pigs and say, you know, if your son and or daughter and or whatever gender they are is interested in it, you know, they're totally welcome to attend. I want to make sure, like, you know, that this is their choice and they feel comfortable doing it. And I'm, you know, really glad you reached out. And hopefully this will be something that, you know, works for them if they feel like it's right. Something like that.
I think another thing to really be cogent of, I think it's a trap a lot of parents fall into, is the idea that, oh, I can just get my kid with other autistic kids and they'll be friends. And that is a normal thing that parents do. And, you know, for their younger kids, setting up play dates with their mom friends. And that's fine. You know, that's totally a good thing. But after a point, you can't force friendship. And you shouldn't force friendship, because if you're forcing friendship, that's not going to create authentic friendships. And the way I kind of like to see it as, you know, if anyone's had a garden, you can't just say, okay, plant, you're gonna grow now, and just pull the plant out. You're just gonna rip the roots out and just mess it up. You have to create an environment where the friendship can happen. Be really cogent on you know, what the autistic social norms are, what their needs are, what the youth actually wants out of a friendship. Give them agency to start asking, like, what does good friendship look like to me? What am I looking for? so they can start thinking about what they actually value in a friend. Because I think a lot of autistics struggle with that. So giving them the practice to start thinking about what friendship means to me and what I want and what I value in a friend, rather than just, having zero autistic role models for friendship in the world and thinking, oh, well, I can't do that, I'll never have a friend. Being able to have those conversations and kind of self-determine and build some agency around that. I think that's a better way to do it. And Zach mentioned like Magic the Gathering groups. I think a lot of the gaming culture works really well because it's a highly structured activity. It's super technical. You can info dump on it and not seem weird. And those I think are really like that's like fertilizer for the autistic friendship garden, which is my fancy way of saying Magic the Gathering is crap.
Or trading sets.
Yeah.
Chelsea, I see you've been trying to unmute for a while. Did you have a question?
Oh, that's all right. Well, it kind of is very similar to the question that Patty asked. Sometimes I've presented this as an idea to some young adults that, I've worked with, and it's not, there's been some hesitancy. And so I really appreciate that you said that, hey, they can contact you and you can walk them through what it might look like. You also mentioned there were some different types of groups and like activity based and that sort of thing. Could you kind of provide me like a general idea of what happens when someone shows up to a Square Pegs meetup?
Yeah, so that's really going to depend on like the specific group. There isn't really like a sort of recipe that all the groups follow. It's really based on, the styles and personality of the specific facilitators and like what the group's centered around. So like if it's, like the groups I run, they're more traditional support groups where like, there's half the time is spent doing a check-in where we go around in a circle and ask, answer like icebreaker questions, like, what's the most autistic thing you've done this month? Have you been doing this month for anything you need support around? Other groups like, we've got a rock climbing group. And so I've never been to that one, but I'm assuming like they show up in their rock climb. Others are more like laid back groups of like coffee shops or bars, and people just sit back and talk, so yeah, it's really going to depend on the specific group, and all of the groups have, descriptions that talk about like what can members expect going to the group. And that's usually where you can get that, those questions answered. Or, you can also email me or the group facilitator and they'll give you that information as well.
Thank you.
Totally. Patty, it looks like you have your hand up.
I do. So I have lots of different thoughts. So I really appreciated what you said about, and I recognize this again as a psychologist and helping folks who are anxious, but then I also have my own anxiety, so I can relate in that way. But that sometimes it will take a while before a person tries something, and then that doesn't mean that they haven't considered what you're saying or kept it there and are thinking about it. So it still matters to mention it. From an autistic perspective, is there anything that I can do to help move that ball forward? So like, because I like Peter's analogy of the fertilizer. Like that's what I'll say is, let's try to see if maybe there's a group that's themed or has an activity, or that somebody you can go with, who, is a friend who would fit in a group like that. They're either autistic or they're, would be welcome because they're supportive. I'm like trying to make it seem a little bit more like a viable thing to think about, or even just a research to look into, without my involvement. And I'm wondering if you can think of specific strategies that help with that level of anxiety.
That's a really good question. I think, my answer is honestly going to be like, it really depends on like what specifically the person needs support around. For some of us, it's like, we really like our routines, and like for me, like adding in new things I do each day is exhausting. It takes a lot of energy, and it's magnified by like how many different steps do I got to take in order to make this thing happen. So in that way you could help get that person the information, maybe write it down on like a checklist, something like that. That can be really helpful. if they have a lot of anxiety, like we would allow supporters to, attend or at least like accompany, members to the square pegs, like if they're communication partners or if they're just help, there to help someone with their anxiety, that, that can be allowed in certain groups. Otherwise I would just say like people will show up to groups like this, when they're ready and when they have the capacity to do it. Oftentimes, just because the world just seems to lead to autistic burnout in so many different circumstances, like it's difficult to, envision yourself going to a group like this when you're, when you're in that place. And so, sometimes it just has to be the right moment. Sometimes it has to be because like, they really have no other place to turn to for like any sort of like formal or informal support. And like, it's the only place they can go to, essentially like receive mental health support. So so it's
Okay.
a long-winded way of saying it depends.
Yeah, but you said something really useful in there, which is steps that, sometimes the executive functioning, the number of things that are going to have to be done and figuring each one of those out makes it too big. So if some of those can get streamlined or reduced or clarified, that could be helpful.
Yeah.
I do want to bring back, and again, if I do this and no one wants to say anything, it's totally fine. But the comment, because we have parents on this call, we have several parents in this meeting, that I can imagine as a parent, you really are worried and really want to be supportive of your child, and you're trying to find the best way to help them. If you feel they're lonely or you feel that they don't fit and they're trying to, get a sense of self-efficacy. And if, coming back to that issue of when parents want to make these things happen and the child isn't wanting that or isn't ready. If anybody wants to weigh in a little bit on where they're coming from on that, in that role, because, parents are usually doing it because they feel like it's going to be helpful to their child and they want to, make their child feel better. I do sometimes just provide reassurance that like you might want that more than the child does, and they're not upset about it at all. That isn't true though. Sometimes, the autistic person is feeling very alone. But I have also seen plenty of people that are content to be with fewer people. So I don't know if any parents want to provide more perspective on that, feeling of how do I get my kid these social opportunities?
I know with my two, when they were growing up, that was what I was told. They needed more social interaction. And it was almost like they were being taught to mask who they were at a young age because they didn't fit in anywhere. And I think I felt guilty because I thought it was something that I was doing wrong, whereas I have my own issues I'm finding out. But now that they're 20 and 24, they are just content in their worlds and they're happy and they're healthy. But I think it's just individual, because I know autistics that really do need that communication and that friendship from others. So it's so hard because like the square peg, that's just a perfect name because it's so true. So I think when you're a parent, you can get pressure from neurotypicals to conform your child a certain way, and you do it out of love a lot of times, and you concern for their mental health, but everyone's so unique. It's such a hard question.
Again, I like the comment about that was what I was told I was supposed to do, or I was doing it because, it was recommended to me. So I'm just looking for what to do. And when I give an idea, that's what I'm going to do.
It's kind of like the eye contact thing. You're told so many times when they're growing up that they have to make eye contact. I hate making eye contact. It makes me so uncomfortable. So, learning that is actually painful to autistic people, some of them, was so mind-blowing to me. And it's just interesting what you learn as you get older and you learn from self-advocates like, oh, I was not doing that correctly. But, we try, really good parents do it out of love and try. And a lot of times we're just lost.
Thank you. Peter?
Peter, whatever you're saying is great, but as always, you're muted.
Thank you, Zach.
Mhm.
No, this is really interesting because in my Bellevue D&D group, we just ran into this, where a kid and the kids actually bonded and verbalized how scary it is and how weird it is to be thrust into a social group. Because we have my D&D group's been going on for 10 years, and there's kids that have been in there for like 3-4 years. You know, they keep on asking to come back, and so it's a pretty tight knit community. And we got a couple new kids, and one of the kids was like, "I'm so worried about them because they probably feel they're." I've been, and multiple kids verbalized, it's so weird when you're thrown into a group, you have no idea what anything is. It's super weird, it's super awkward, it's super strange, it's not normal. And I think that is something that can create a trauma response when it's not handled well. And something that I was reflecting within my own practice, because some of the kids know each other really well and are really spicy to each other. So a newcomer coming into that and seeing a kid just ripping into one of the other kids, fully, they have a very good relationship, but everything they say to each other is an insult. That could be like, oh my goodness, I'm surrounded by sociopaths. And kind of being able to give kids, and this is a really hard thing because yes, I can say flat out my groups do benefit kids. They do a lot of good, and it's been a lot of work. But the act of joining a new group being so traumatic and so weird and so artificial, I think can be really, really hard because your typical kids don't go through stuff like this, and they know it's not normal, and they know that the point of these groups is to try to fix them or something like that, and not knowing like what it's going to be like. Is this going to be some group where I'm going to be forced to make eye contact, or is this going to be a cool chill group where I can just stack dice and kill orcs? There's always a lot of ambiguity. So I think one of the really critical things that you can do, if possible, is instead of just signing the kid up and saying you're going to this group, really trying to communicate with whoever's running the group, and make there as much transparency about it. And that's why I'm glad Zach is very transparent about a lot of this stuff. So you can get those questions answered ahead of time, because there's probably a lot of trauma history there.
Any other comments or questions? I think it's been a lot of great food for thought. I think I like to summarize things. That's the psychologist in me reflecting, but I feel like you've created space here, for these meetups, and that's a thing that was and is still more. There's more needed of things that are available like that. I've heard a lot about those of us that aren't autistic remembering the constant struggle and trauma that came before this effort to go to a group, and how that impacts your ability to want to try it. And to be sensitive to that. Also, all the anxiety and the, adding new things and how that affects it in the steps. That people, by and large, whether you're a parent, an autistic, or a professional, this is all in the service of trying to provide an outlet or support, but how you come at it might be based on what and but when we try to tailor it as best we can or find out more, that can make it possibly more successful. I don't know if you have any other bottom line messages, Zach, that you want people to kind of take away from with Square Pegs.
I did, but y'all have already said them, so not too much need there. I think it just comes down to, community is really powerful and important for us. It's really hard to find that community. It's really easy to feel isolated in this world, as anyone, let alone as an autistic person. And we'll seek out that community when we're ready. Sometimes we might need support with that seeking out. Sometimes we'll be able to do it on our own. And I think it's just allowing for things to happen, how they'll happen, and not focusing too much the outcome, but I think just letting things get there as they're going to get there. That makes sense. So yeah, thank you all so much for having me. I will pop my email in chat if y'all have any follow-up questions. And yeah, I hope you all have a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. And we really appreciate the idea that you're willing to do some warm handoffs sometimes, because I know like that can make it easier when people aren't going in completely on their own to new situations. So thank you.
For sure. Totally. All right. Have a great day all. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
So that was great. Does anybody want to start us off for resource sharing? Anybody have things they want to share?
Yeah, I can oh, hey Chelsea, I saw you're about ready to talk too. Just real quick, I always like to share our PAVE calendar, but our website's a little goofy right now, but I'll see if I can get it up. Yeah, just a couple things. We have our awesome autism group. That is the second Wednesday of the month from 12 to 1 that we started up again. And yeah, our support groups are all in full force now. And our legislative forum is coming up in November, which